My parents discovered what I was earning before I even had time to let it sink in myself. One minute I was sitting alone in my car, rereading the promotion email like it might disappear, and the next they were at my front door with a store-bought cake and eyes that had already started doing math. There were no hugs, no real smiles, just that particular look people get when they've decided something belongs to them before you've even agreed. They sat down at my kitchen table like they owned it, and within 20 minutes, they told me they expected half my paycheck every month. What they didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. My name is Serena Cole. I'm 29 years old, and I grew up learning that love in my household came with a price tag attached. Not the kind of lesson they teach in school. The kind you absorb slowly in small doses until one day you realize every birthday gift, every school lunch, every pair of shoes was being logged somewhere in your parents' minds as a debt you'd eventually repay. I left home at 19 with a secondhand laptop, a duffel bag, and a scholarship to study accounting in Columbus. I told myself I was just going to college. What I was really doing was running. I worked the closing shift at a campus cafe, studied through the night, graduated with honors, and spent the next 6 years climbing towards something stable. By 28, I was a senior budget analyst at a consulting firm in Cincinnati, living alone in a clean, quiet apartment that I had furnished piece by piece with my own money. I was proud of myself in the private, careful way people are when they've never really had anyone cheering for them. The evening they showed up, I remember noticing my mother's perfume before I even opened the door. Sweet and sharp, the kind she only wore when she wanted to make an impression. My father came in behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning my apartment with that familiar squint he used when calculating what things cost. My mother set the cake on my counter without ceremony, a plain white box from the grocery store, and pulled out a chair like she'd been invited to stay. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't say she was proud. She looked at me and said, "So we heard the new salary is quite a step up." And just like that, the visit revealed exactly what it was. I kept my voice level. I told her yes, that I had worked hard for a long time to get here. My father made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh and said that I was doing well, better than them, and that after everything they had sacrificed, surely I could find a way to give something back. That word, sacrifice, landed in the room like a stone thrown through glass. I had heard it my entire childhood. Every report card, every argument, every time I asked for anything, that word appeared. My parents had survived, and somehow surviving had been repackaged over the years as selfless devotion. My mother leaned across the table with soft eyes and told me that 50% of my monthly income, just to help them stabilize, was the least I could do for family. She said it gently, the way someone delivers a sentence they've rehearsed. Something in my chest pulled tight. I sat back in my chair and looked at them, really looked at them, and I felt the years pressing in. The guilt I had carried since 19, the phone calls I dreaded, the holidays where I smiled through things I should have said out loud. I told them quietly that 50% of my income was not something I was willing to give. My mother's expression shifted immediately. She called me dramatic. My father said that they had given me life, given me a foundation, and that I owed them the chance to stand back up. I asked him how long they had been on their feet before deciding mine were better to stand on instead. He didn't like that. My mother told me I had changed, that I had let the corporate world harden me, that I had forgotten where I came from. And here's the thing about that particular argument. It is designed to make you feel ashamed of becoming someone your family couldn't control anymore. I wasn't hardened. I was clear. There is a difference, and it took me years to learn it. I stood up slowly, not in anger, but in the kind of stillness that comes when you have finally decided something for good. I walked to the small cabinet beside my refrigerator and opened the drawer where I had placed an envelope 3 weeks earlier. I picked it up and held it between my fingers and turned back to face them. I told them that everything they were really looking for was inside that envelope. I set it on the table. My mother's eyes went straight to it. My father sat up, and neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. My mother reached for the envelope before I had even stepped back. There was something almost hungry about the way her hand moved toward it, that certainty that whatever was inside was already hers. I placed my hand over hers, gently but firmly, and told her to wait. I needed her to hear something first. I needed them both to understand that walking into my home and making demands was something I would not be allowing again. My father muttered something about me being theatrical. My mother told me I was hurting them by being so cold. I told her that clarity was not coldness. I stepped back and let her open it. The papers that slid out were not a check. They were not a letter of apology. They were a legally notarized declaration that my parents had asked me to sign 3 years earlier, back when they were briefly concerned about protecting my finances from their own debts. They had framed it as a loving gesture at the time. They had told our extended family about how responsible they were being, encouraging their daughter to be financially independent. What they had forgotten, or perhaps never truly read, was that the document they pushed me to have notarized worked both ways. It established clearly that I held no financial obligation to them, and that any future claims to my income would be considered without legal standing. I had kept that document in a folder under my bed for 3 years. I never thought I would need it. Then I did. Watching their faces move through confusion and then recognition, and then something that looked very much like fear, was one of the quietest moments of my life. My mother read the page twice, then a third time. My father kept blinking as though the words were rearranging themselves. She said it couldn't be real. I told her their signatures were at the bottom. He said they hadn't understood what they were signing. I reminded him that he had been the one to hand me the pen. The room went very still. What came next was something I had not fully expected, even with everything I had prepared for. My mother's voice shifted into something harder. She told me they would take it to court if they had to, and I told them that they already had. I watched their faces go blank as I explained that I had received notice of a parental support petition filed under my name, and that the supporting messages they had submitted, supposedly sent by me, contained a phone number that was 1 digit away from my actual contact. They had forged evidence. They had taken what started as entitlement and crossed it into something criminal. My mother reached into her purse with shaking hands. My father's voice cracked when he told me I wouldn't go through with it. I told him it was already in motion. The buzzer rang. When I opened the door, my friend and attorney Camille stepped in alongside an officer carrying a folder. The papers were served. My parents stood in my kitchen, looking smaller than I had ever seen them, my mother pressing her hands to her face, my father gripping the back of a chair for balance. My mother said I had trapped them, that the envelope was a setup. Camille told her that the envelope contained a document they had signed willingly, and that ignorance of its contents was not a legal defense. My father said we were family. Camille said family is not a justification for fraud. When the door closed behind the officer, I stood alone in my apartment and breathed. The morning of the hearing was gray and cold. My parents sat at their table looking exhausted, like people who had been arguing with themselves all night. My mother had clearly been crying. My father sat rigid, jaw set. When Camille presented the phone carrier records proving the messages had been fabricated, the judge's expression shifted into something measured and serious. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and my Aunt Gloria walked in with her cane. She was 71 years old and had driven 2 hours to be there. She took the stand and spoke without hesitation. She said I had left home as a teenager and built everything I had without a single dollar from my parents. She said I had called her crying in college because I couldn't afford textbooks, and my parents had refused to help. She said I owed them nothing. My mother made a small, broken sound. The judge dismissed the petition and issued a fine for the falsified evidence. Outside the courthouse, the air hit me like something I had been holding my breath against for years. I stood on the steps and looked out at the street and felt, for a few seconds, completely weightless. My parents came out behind me and stood there not speaking. They looked like people who had expected a different ending to a story they had written entirely in their heads. The weeks after were quiet in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. I moved into a new apartment, one with tall windows and afternoon light that pooled across the floor by 3 o'clock. I bought a small wooden shelf and filled it with plants. I cooked dinner slowly on evenings when I used to rush through everything. I called my Aunt Gloria twice a week, and we talked about ordinary things. A card arrived from her about 10 days after the hearing. It said simply, "You protected yourself, and I love you for it." I kept it on the shelf between the plants. A letter came from my mother eventually. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope before I even picked it up. It was not an apology. It was a list of ailments and needs dressed up in the language of sorrow, ending with a request for financial help. There was no mention of what had happened in the courtroom, no acknowledgement of what they had tried to do. I folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in the recycling bin. My hands were completely steady. My Aunt Gloria passed away 4 months later, peacefully, in her own home. She left me a small savings account she had been adding to quietly for years. I used it to start an emergency fund for young women in my city who were trying to leave financially controlling households. It felt like the right way to pass something forward. One evening, I drove to the river and parked and sat watching the water move in the dark. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I wasn't bracing for a call or rehearsing a conversation. I was just there, in a life that felt completely and finally like mine. That envelope didn't hold money. It held the first boundary I ever set and kept without apologizing for it. If you have ever had to choose your own peace over someone else's expectation of you, if you have ever had to protect yourself from the very people who should have been protecting you, I want to hear from you in the comments. And if you want more stories about women who walked through the fire and came out standing, subscribe. There are more coming.